Welcome back to Ask the Arb, where this week we're going to pull apart the tangled roots of development because this week the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has given developers all sorts of mixed messages. So stick around this week while we pull it all apart.
Excellent. Right, folks, here we go. So, what has Rachel Reeves, what she actually said this week? Well, she's pledged to unblock the arteries of the planning system. Her example, and the one that has been flung around since this planning and infrastructure bill was raised back a couple of months now. It was probably April, May time, something like that. The big one that everyone's talking about is this £100 million HS2 bat tunnel, which has been framed as overkill. It's important to note that ecologists will have suggested what to do, but they certainly wouldn't have come up with the idea of a £100 million bat tunnel. So, make of that what you will. Anyway, the new mechanism, this nature recovery fund, is for developers to pay to basically offset ecological damage instead of commissioning surveys or redesigning sites. So, instead of protecting habitats, we're now pricing them up. That's a hell of a shift, isn't it? And essentially, I would call that pay to play, and pay to play is not going to be good for the environment. They tried it with great crested newts, and it's mixed success. So essentially, instead of having lots of season-specific surveys carried out, what the developer can do is they can pay into a central fund to offset the damage they do on site. What happens to the newts that may be on site that we don't know about? Well, obviously they get killed, don't they? So what's driving this reform? Essentially, the big one that the politicians talk about is UK housing targets are way behind where they should be. Developers, councils and investors have all been extremely vocal about red tape. Have a look at the episode with Sean Tofts from the Small Site Alliance. He came on and spoke to me on the RCR podcast, and that'd be a good one. Kian, stick that in the show notes or whatever the kids say. Planning departments are massively under-resourced, and decision-making is painfully slow. And at the end of the day, I get it. The system is broken, but where I kind of take issue with the narrative that ecology is the problem is that it isn't. That isn't the case. Ecologists didn't create the backlog. Arboriculturalists didn't create the backlog. Understaffed local planning authorities and poor quality applications is what is causing the problem, and that is going to get worse and worse and worse, in my opinion, as applicants start to up their use of artificial intelligence to produce applications, and local planning authorities are way behind with the assessment of that. So how the Nature Fund works and doesn't, well, instead of providing a ecological report, a developer may well pay into a central pot, and that money may be theoretically used for local nature recovery schemes. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Except, who oversees the funds? Will the habitats be restored in the same or similar location? Is there a time lag between destruction and mitigation? And does this undermine BNG, biodiversity net gain? Nobody really knows what's going on with that at the moment. If BNG is meant to be a net improvement, this kind of feels like a bit of a shortcut, doesn't it? Not a solution. But before we go any further with this, it's time for... You've got the questions, the planning system's a nightmare. We have got the answers. Welcome to the Planning Permission Panic Line. It doesn't get any better, does it? Yes, planning permission, panic line. So let's have a look. What have we got today? So we've had a lot of ecology related ones on this, but we've got here Mike in Milton Keynes. That's never his real name, is it? Mike in Milton Keynes. I asked the team to anonymise this, and I think they're being funny. Let's say Steve in Milton Keynes, says, our garden has some overgrown trees and bushes. Will that delay our planning if an ecologist says it's habitat? Let's deal with the tree side of things first. So, you've heard me say this before. If there are any trees on or adjacent to the red line boundary of the site, it's likely you will need a tree survey. You need a tree survey if there are trees there that are bigger than your fist. I'm showing a fist for our YouTube visitors at kind of chest height. Okay, so that is the height, 1.5 meters, 150 mil, 1.5 meters at diameter at breast height. So if you've got trees or woody vegetation in your garden that is bigger than a fist at chest height, it's likely you're going to need a tree survey. And I can hear what you're saying. You're saying, Matt, why don't I just fell the trees before I put my planning application in? That is a brilliant question, and that did used to happen. Parking to one side, the ecological elements of that, what you really need to consider is that, quite frankly, any kind of preemptive felling is likely going to jeopardise your planning application. The tools that LPAs have now in terms of reversing the clock back and having a look to see what was there previously, think Google Earth, Google Street View, Blue Sky, and some of the other high quality satellite imagery providers that they use, they will be able to see what was there. And if there were trees there 6 months ago and then there's nothing there when your planning application goes in, that is essentially going to raise eyebrows. So that's the tree side of things. From an ecological perspective, absolutely do not clear anything. Reason being is that if the local authority feels that there's been clearance carried out at the site and you need to submit biodiversity net gain assessment to support your application, then the site will be baselined at almost an imaginary value based on what they think it should be. So you're not actually going to save yourself anything. You're just going to cause massive problems down the line. Should we have one more? Let's have one more. So, got to get the music in. There's another. Oh no, this has got to be her real name. Carolyn in Exeter, what is the difference between a tree survey and an ecology report, and do I need both? I think I've probably covered that with Mike / Steve's question. So Caroline in Exeter, a tree survey essentially just deals with the trees. An ecology survey looks at the protected species, protected habitats. It looks at a much wider area. There are two main types of ecology surveys to support a planning application. There's a preliminary ecological assessment, which is a combination of a desktop study and a site visit, and then biodiversity net gain is separate, but both of those do have quite a degree of overlap. Some of the information that the tree survey picks up gets duplicated in the ecology survey, but not vice versa. So don't think you can have an ecology survey done and that will box off the tree survey. The two disciplines are very different. So hopefully that has helped Mike and Caroline. Let me tick those off my list. Okay, so back to today. What have we got? Let's have a look here. So, what does this all mean for ecologists and arboriculturalists? Well, essentially our profession, it means there's possibly a drop in demand for site-specific surveys, method statements, and all that kind of stuff. Is that a concern to my sector and my industry? Yes, of course it is, but that's not why we're banging a stake in the ground. We're banging a stake in the ground because we genuinely believe that this planning and infrastructure bill as proposed is a massive backward step for ecology and the environment in the UK. And, you know, the risk here is that developers start treating ecology as a line item in a spreadsheet instead of a sort of an active constraint. And we've already seen this sort of public perception where, you know, there's a shift and ecologists may well actually become a blocker rather than a safeguarder. And that's becoming a huge obstacle for us. At the end of the day, you know, we're not the planning police. We're the people who try and help you avoid long-term ecological and reputational damage. Nobody wants to be the person that puts a bird's nest through a chipper or wipes out a maternity roost of bats or bulldozes a badger. You know, if we're brought in too late or replaced by a check, it's never going to end well, is it? So why this should matter to developers and architects? Well, at the end of the day, regardless of the requirements for planning, and this is really, 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 really important, you still have legal obligations under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So even if you're not required to provide these surveys to support your planning application, you still have a legal obligation to make sure you don't kill, harm, damage wildlife. Planning policy may well flex and change, but the law hasn't, and these two are going to butt heads over the coming months. My opinion is that cutting corners here could lead to stop notices, legal action, bad PR. You can imagine the scenario, you don't feel that you need to do anything more. You get your planning consent, you push forwards with the site, you start bulldozing the site, and Mrs. Miggins comes and speaks to the site manager and said, did you know there was a badger set in the middle of that site? And you may not know that and face prosecution. So, just because Rachel Reeves says don't worry about bats doesn't mean to say Natural England, Nature Scott, etc. won't come knocking. So before we go any further, it is time for... Hi folks, it's time for You Couldn't Plan It, the feature where me and my team have scoured the internet for stupid, silly and downright infuriating planning related facts. Let's go. So, what have we got this week on You Couldn't Plan It? Let's have a look. We have got, it seems like all of these have come from the sun, doesn't it? This week we have got Google Earth saves decking. So let's have a look at that one. Let me open that up. We'll put links to these stories so that you know I'm not making it up in the show notes as well. In this one, on deck, I went to war with council over a legal garden deck and won thanks to Google Earth. They didn't have a leg to stand on. So what's going on here? I suppose this underlines my point about the quality of satellite image now, doesn't it? The story says a homeowner has won an ongoing row with the council over his decking thanks to Google Earth. Gareth Leake, age 58. Why do they put that in? How is that relevant? Was left stunned after planning officials claimed he needed retrospective planning permission for garden decking that had been in place for 8 years. Mr. Leake used Google Earth to prove that he should be allowed to keep his decking, and according to the satellite images, it had been in place for 8 years. So the councillors, the raised grey and white platform stood too tall at 83 centimetres high, which is half a metre over the limit requiring planning permission. But instead of backing down, Mr. Leake, who lives in Pontypool, Gwent, took to Google Earth to save his beloved decking. All the Welsh listeners have turned off now. If an unauthorised extension has been in place for more than 4 years without enforcement action, you may legally be allowed to keep it. The aerial snap provided by the app showed the decking firmly in place in June 2018. So there we go. He also, which is unusual for the UK, was backed up by a neighbour who claimed the decking was in place in the garden since at least 2019. So there we go. Mr. Leake retrospectively applied for a certificate of lawful development and it all went his way in the end. So you see, satellite imagery, Google Earth, etc., can work to your advantage as well as against you. So one to bear in mind. And that is the end of You Couldn't Plan It today. Let's get back to the episode where now we're going to talk about balanced development and perhaps a better approach. So my view on all of this really is that we should be encouraging early ecological engagement, not exclusion. We should be introducing faster pathways and standardised mitigation protocols. So we should be relying a lot more on tech now. We use drones a lot within this company for habitat mapping and have done for a long time, and we can use AI to assess that, which reduces costs without cutting corners. At the end of the day, we should be investing in better ecology, not less of it. Speed the process up as much as we possibly can, because really what we have to think about here is that, what happens when a protected species is missed on site because nobody's looked. So that's what they're proposing. If we're just going to pay into these local recovery plans, nature recovery plans, there's no surveys being carried out on site. How do we know what's there? Nobody's looking. Will these nature funds actually fund nature or just fund development? So what's going to happen with the money? Where's that going to go? And ultimately, I guess, are we walking into a future where every ecological constraint has a price tag. Got bats, pay us this. Got badgers, pay us this. So, to wrap this one up, in my opinion, what is the takeaway from this? Ecology is not the enemy at the end of the day. The planning system needs reform, not massive change, but it does need reform. Trading habitats for handouts is really not the answer on this. If you are a developer, architect, or consultant wondering how these changes will hit your projects, we're always happy to help people out. Our advice is free at the end of the day. If you're tired of being the last to know about legislation that blows up your Gantt chart, subscribe, stay ahead. This is the RCR podcast, and I will see you next week.